if you want to influence other people, I'm just putting this up here for you to see. One set or several sets of theories out there and several books out there will tell you that leadership is about influence. And so things like a personal appeal, being able to look at somebody and see what is truly important to them. And this child is starving over in this other country, or these animals need your help, or this disease is very deadly. Those do influence people, and they take the form of anything from rewards to coercion to communication, exchange tactics. Here's what I'll give you if you do that for me. Consultation. We'll see in a minute about participation and working with people. Coalition tactics, getting a larger and larger group together, because the truth is a lot of times we don't want to take actions on our own, but if we see that there's a group of people wanting to take that action, then we'll go along with that group. It's where we get mob and riot mentalities, but at the same time we get groundswell effects that can do very positive things and clean up bad situations. Coalition tactics is exactly the response that we had to 9/11, when everybody around the country and around the world were all donating money to the survivors of the 9/11 attacks and to their families. That's the same mentality that you get when you have a mob mentality that goes out and tries to hurt people. It's the same concept. It's just one is done more on a positive side and the other is done more on a negative side. But understanding those techniques, in other words, not worrying about whether or not you're a certain kind of leader and have certain kind of characteristics, but using situations and techniques to control the leadership part. It's a different way to pull these theories out. So what you've seen, excuse me, up to this point has been two different types of concepts. One is, let's find a person who could be a good leader, however we define that. And that person then will be able to lead followers down the path that they need to go. And the other side of this, which is, well, let's not worry as much about who the leader is, and let's worry about the way that the person does the leadership. So it's, if Bobby could learn the rational persuasion method and Susie could learn the rational persuasion method, they'd both be successful because they were both using the right method, no matter what Bobby looked like or had as his background, or Susie had as her background, or what she could do otherwise. Behavioral theories. Now, these two behavioral theories, interestingly, coming out of Michigan and Ohio State, major rivals. If you've not been in Michigan or Ohio, you would not know how big this rivalry is between these two. And it's not just in athletics, although it's very big in athletics, but it's not just there. The states of Michigan and Ohio are rivals against each other in many ways. But these two models came out, and they both say basically the same thing. It's said in a little different way, but it's said about the same way. Michigan leadership model talks about job-centered behavior, concern for effective production, and initiating structure is what Ohio State model uses, which is basically the same thing. In other words, focusing on the task, and you'll see that word task coming up in the next slide. The task to be accomplished is what job-centered behavior and initiating structure are both about. The social side, or people orientation, is what the next ones are. Employee-centered behavior and consideration are both viewpoints about being focused on the follower. So the first concept is focusing on the task. The second is focusing on the person, the follower person. I bring this up because you're going to see a couple of theories that come out here, which that's exactly what they're trying to do, is saying, and this is where we get what's called a contingency theory. You don't choose necessarily the one best method to lead people. Rather, you see the situation. You understand your abilities to focus on the people and your relationships with the people. You realize the difficulty or complexity of the task and the interplay between those. And then you choose the correct type of leadership style to go with it. So choosing a rational persuasion method would not necessarily be the method to use in certain situations. Perhaps you need to use a coalition method instead. And so it's not choosing the best method to lead and always using that same best method. Finding a hammer and always using a hammer, no matter whether it's hammering in a nail or trying to fix your microwave. I've got a tool and I know how to use it. And it's also not necessarily about trying to find the one best person to be in the leadership role. It's rather looking at what needs to get done and who it is that needs to do it, and how do you get those people towards trying to actually get the job done. And so Hersey and Blanchard take these concepts and create what you see in the top center of this slide. They create a grid with more or less what they consider to be the 4 best types of leadership based upon the task. Now, at the bottom, you'll see a continuum called follower readiness. This is a consideration about whether or not the people who are your followers, who need to do the work or accomplish the task of some sort, whatever that would be. This continuum here is focusing on the people themselves and how prepared they are to accomplish the task, whatever that task is. But your grid, the quad that you have at the top, focuses somewhat on that and somewhat on the leadership, how well the leader gets along with the followers, and how complex or structured the task itself is. So, on the Y side, that's the left side of the grid, the relationship behavior part. You look at relatively low relationships or low support that your followers give to you versus high support they give to you. How well do you get along with your followers? The higher that is, the better you get along with people. That changes the style of leadership. It's not that you have to be one or the other. It's just it changes the style of the leadership. And the difficulty, the complexity, the strangeness of the task, whatever it would be, the lower that is, the more simple that task is, then you have the task behavior on the low side. Versus on the high side, it's something that, it may be higher importance, but you also may have much more structure out of it. So, take a look at this. You'll notice that it has S1, S2, S3, S4 situations, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they direct here that the leader in these 4 different situations need to use these 4 different types of tactics. Telling people, if you have a high task behavior but low relationship, that is, if you have high readiness and abilities on the task side, but you're not worried about relationships as much, you can simply tell people what it is they need to do, and they will go ahead and do that. Versus on the complete other side of that, delegating comes about when the relationship behavior is not important, and you don't necessarily have a good or bad relationship with followers, but that's really not critical to this task. And developing people's knowledge about the task is not nearly as important. You can simply delegate it out there because they can figure this part out on their own. And in some situations, that's pretty good. Being a micromanager in that situation is not very positive. Versus participating in selling at the top, where you have a lot more interaction between the leader and the followers, no matter what the task level is, you have a lot more relationship and developing social interaction between the leadership and the followership, because that is important to accomplishing the goals. So, as you see here, they're not trying to say this type of a leader should be chosen. They're saying instead that this is the type of way that you need to try to get people to do something, whether it's selling or any of those things. Fred Fiedler looked at this, kept the task structure and leader-subordinate relationship, what we just saw with the last group. But he looked at leadership assuming the leader needs to get things done, and also assuming the type of person that leader is. When he did his research here, he did it using a survey and had, you'll notice it says LPC, Least Preferred Coworker Model. He had a survey that he had supervisors and others fill out. And he was trying to find how well people got along with other people and how they interacted with other people. And especially he wanted to look at the least preferred coworker, that is, the person you least want to work with. So if you were to consider that, think of somebody that you've worked with or gone to school with or that you've known personally. And you really, this is the last person that you would want to be stuck with on earth. If there were only two people out there, it's the last person that you'd want to do. So think of that kind of a person. Well, this is the least preferred coworker. And if you have that situation, then how do you respond to these different questions? And so he had supervisors respond to this survey. Is the person nice, or are they not nice? Is the person cold, or are they hot? Is the person productive or unproductive? And so with that person in mind, you would be describing what that person's like. And he found that certain types of supervisors were more forgiving and more relationship-oriented than others. Some people were very judgmental and had very strong negative feelings towards the least preferred coworker theory. So he created this model here. And he was looking at ways that you could put the right kind of a person into the right kind of a situation. So you'll notice on the left, the situation favorableness. He says that in very favorable conditions where the leader is going to have very little negative effect, you put in a low LPC leader, somebody who really doesn't have to get along with people well, because the situation allows you to very easily get the work done without the need for having somebody who's a well-loved leader necessarily. Because what you see is that leader-subordinate relations are good. Generally, you get along with people okay. You have a high position power. In other words, you actually do have a fair amount of strength that you can use, whether it's rewards or coercion. And then the task structure is high. People know exactly what it is that needs to be done. Well, if you're getting along well with people, you have a lot of authority, and everybody knows the job that needs to get done, you can still be a low LPC type of leader, be very judgmental or whatever it is you need. But the work's going to get done pretty easy. You need, in unfavorable conditions, where you don't get along with anybody, where I don't have any power, and where nobody knows what it is that needs to get done, You need a low LPC leader as well. You go, what? What? That doesn't make sense. If you don't get along, if you don't have any power, and if you don't know what it is that needs to get done, you should have a high LPC leader. Well, that's not what Fred Fiedler's saying. What he's saying is that in that situation, in an unfavorable situation, it's hard to get any work done anyway. It's relatively unproductive. The high LPC leader is where you need somebody who's a very good people kind of a person in a situation where things are kind of murky. If it's all good or it's all bad, then the leader's not that important. But if it's a murky situation, well, you kind of get along with people, but nobody has a clue what needs to get done. Or you don't get along with people, but you've got some level of power, and not like you don't get along with people at all, but you have difficulties with your relationship, but everybody understands the nature of the work is something important. You've got some sort of reward or coercive power. You need to be a kind of people person of some sort in order to make sure that the work is ethically done and properly done, and you don't destroy the organization. In a favorable situation, you're not likely to destroy the organization because the organization is going to get along just fine. In an unfavorable situation, the organization may already be destroying itself, so how much harm could you do? But in a medium situation, you really do have to take care where you go, because the organization could suffer a lot if you're not careful.